A corpse dressed in full papal regalia, propped upright on a throne, blackened fingers curling with decay. A grotesque ecclesiastical horror show? Or just another day in the notoriously scandalous medieval papacy? Welcome back to Historical Horror, a series in which I draw upon my two absolute favorite subjects to bring you the strangest, creepiest, darkest tales from our past. Today, we're talking about the Pope who was put on trial after he died in a shocking episode that became infamously known as the Cadaver Synod. At the end of the 9th century, the city of Rome was on the brink, ravaged by political infighting, crippled by factional power struggles within the church, and a dizzying carousel of popes rising and falling in rapid succession. Amid this chaos was Formosus, a man who had spent his career walking a tightrope of ambition, intrigue, and shifting alliances. He had been exiled, accused of treason, welcomed back, and finally elected pope. Formosus reigned for 5 turbulent years. And while history is split on whether he was a reformer or a schemer, one thing is clear. He made very powerful enemies. As Pope, Formosus seemed to love involving himself in the conflicts of other powerful rulers. Which, sure, he's a medieval pope. That's sort of what the job entails. Only problem was, he did seem to have a talent for consistently backing the losers in said conflicts. First, there was the Phodian Schism, in which Formosus backed the newly instated Patriarch of Constantinople and refused to recognize ordinations and offices that had been instated by the former and recently ousted Patriarch. But then the Eastern bishops were like, yeah, we're not going to listen to you. And they just went ahead and recognized the ordinations anyway. Formosus then involved himself in the conflict between Odo of Paris and Charles the Simple in their rivalry for the French throne. Siding with the latter, Formosus called for Odo to cede the throne to Charles. And Odo, who was riding a wave of popularity for successfully defending France against the Vikings, was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. Then there was the whole Holy Roman Emperor affair. This conflict is kind of complicated, but here's an oversimplified rapid-fire rundown. So, the Carolingian king of Germany at the time was this guy Arnulf of Carinthia. And he'd been butting heads with the current Roman Emperor Guy III of Spoleto for years over various dynastic power disputes. The Pope and the Emperor of Rome were traditionally close allies and working buddies, but Formosus and Guy had struggled to establish a vibe. And Formosus kind of decided that he just didn't really like Guy. Ultimately, Formosus sides with the King of Germany over the Emperor of Rome, breaking the long-standing tradition of alliance between Rome's ecclesiastical and imperial heads. In defiance, Guy forces Formosus to crown his son, Lambert, as his co-emperor, while he himself is still alive, just to ensure there's no funny business with the succession. Formosus then turns around and basically invites the King of Germany to come to Rome and liberate Italy from Guy's rule, which Arnulf actually does, but that turns into a whole mess of its own. To make a long story short, Arnulf invades, Guy dies on the campaign, and his son Lambert flees. Formosus crowns Arnulf king of Italy, but then Arnulf has a stroke and goes back home to Germany, after which it becomes very clear that he's king of Italy in name only. And eventually, the Italians are like, screw this, and everyone goes back to supporting Lambert. Formosus dies on April 4th, 896. He's immediately succeeded by Boniface VI, who has the unfortunate distinction of being pope for only 15 days before he too dies. He's succeeded by Stephen VI, who's elected pope in May of 896. A lot of sixes. And here's where things get real medieval, in the most literal, macabre sense. Once Stephen becomes pope, Lambert and his mother, Empress Engeltrude, return to Rome. Though now securely back in power, they're still pissed at all the bullshit Formosus put them through, so they start whispering in Stephen's ear. In January 897, 9 months after his predecessor's death and burial, Stephen had Formosus's decaying body exhumed and dragged up from the crypt. The corpse was dressed in papal robes, seated on a throne in the Lateran Basilica, and put on trial. A formal ecclesiastical trial, complete with bishops, clerical witnesses, and even a deacon appointed to speak on behalf of the accused. Before a crowd of stunned and scandalized onlookers, Stephen accused the corpse of perjury, corruption, and ascending to the papacy illegally. At the end of the trial, Formosus, or rather his corpse, was found guilty. All his papal acts were annulled, his corpse was stripped of his papal vestments, his 3 fingers of blessing were hacked off, and his body was thrown into the river Tiber. The city of Rome lost its ever-loving mind. The grotesque spectacle shocked even the church's harshest critics, turning public opinion sharply against Stephen. Riots broke out, and an uprising ousted Stephen VI from the papacy. Formosus's body was recovered from the Tiber, and Stephen was imprisoned. Within months, he would be found strangled to death in his cell. Stephen's successor, Pope Theodore II, quickly reversed the trial's verdict. Formosus was redressed in his pontifical vestments and reburied in St. Peter's Basilica. 2 subsequent synods nullified the Cadaver Synod, excommunicated 7 cardinals involved in the trial, and prohibited any future trial of a corpse. The Cadaver Synod became one of the darkest stains on papal history, a tale of obsession, political vengeance, and ritual humiliation that honestly reads like horror fiction. History is so often written by the victors. It's a much rarer thing to see a corpse get the final word.